Good morning. It is the Awesemo NBA strategy show. 13 NBA games to talk about. So going to be trying to go through these, pretty briskly. I don't want to be spending too much time on any individual game because or else Adam and I are going to be here for 3 hours or something like that. And we've got other parts of our job that we have to do and also other things we have to attend to. Today's show is sponsored by Prize Picks. And like I said, 13-game NBA slate, plenty of other content coming up on the YouTube channel. Do us a favor, like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. There's going to be a lot that changes during the day. You're going to want to have access to the NBA injury report video that Adam and I do later, Adam's GPP videos, NBA deeper dive, live before lock, all of that. Adam, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty well. Excited to have more than 3 games. Kind of would prefer to have like 3 or 4 less than we do, but nice to be back to a full NBA slate.
Yeah, and let's just jump right into it right now. Our show is sponsored by Prize Picks. Thank you to them for sponsoring. First game here is the Orlando Magic at the Philadelphia 76ers. It's also the game with one of the larger spreads on this slate. Philadelphia 76ers favored by 11.5 points. On the Orlando side, we have Wendell Carter Jr. is questionable to play. He has missed the last handful of games. If he does come back, Adam, how does that impact some of the other guys in the front court for this team?
So, I mean, the first spot that it obviously impacts is Chuma Okeke, I assume, goes back to the bench. But it also would, I think, take Mo Wagner out of the rotation. He's been playing, Orlando's been running a little bit deeper rotation than they were earlier in the year. I expect if Carter comes back that Okeke moves back to the bench and it kicks Wagner further down the bench. We've had Robin Lopez starting ahead of Bamba. I assume sooner than later Bamba's going to replace him. But if Carter comes back, it does cut into the rebounding numbers a little bit for whoever is at center alongside him.
Yeah, and Mo Bamba, he was obviously the starter before he missed time. Then he's come back with a minutes restriction in last 2 games, 17 and 20 minutes. I think there is a pretty decent chance that Bamba ends up starting this game, kind of regardless if Wendell Carter Jr. is in or out. You just alluded to that before. Would you be looking at Bamba as a solid GPP option if he is back in the starting lineup?
Yeah, I mean, 5,300 if he's starting, you know that he can do well on a, point per dollar basis. He certainly has upside. He blocks a lot of shots. If he's starting, I would feel comfortable expecting at least 24 minutes from him, if not more. Like you said, they've been slowly ramping him up. So that makes me hesitant to just plug him back into 28 minutes. But at the same time, if he starts, I have a hard time thinking the plan is to still only play 20 minutes or something like that. It's also a really risky spot because of the foul trouble potentially against Embiid, on top of it just being, a difficult spot in general. But at 5,300, it is a situation where he's priced now. He's at like an awkward price point now where he's too expensive still for his bench role. But if he were to go back to his normal starting role, he would very clearly be underpriced.
And then as for the guards here, Jalen Suggs, he's back in the mix. He's had a minutes restriction as of late, very similar to what Mo Bamba's had. Cole Anthony, he's been the best fantasy producer on the team for the majority of the season. Do any of the guards really stand out to you as good fantasy plays?
Cole Anthony at 7K seems really appealing. He's one guy that I'm not too concerned about ever being phased out of the rotation. One just kind of overarching concern I have with Orlando, and this showed up last game, and I mentioned it a minute ago, they're playing just more bodies. So when you go through and you actually try and map out where these minutes are going, like you can say, oh, well, I think Cole Anthony has a chance to play 34. And like I said the other day, I think Jalen Suggs has a chance to play 26. But when you actually start going through and like mapping out these minutes, you realize that especially for more than like one of those guys to get to where you'd really like them 2 minutes wise, you really have to like cut somebody back. And for right now, like RJ Hampton is still firmly in the rotation. Terrence Ross is still firmly in the rotation. Gary Harris is still playing 30 minutes. So I think that Anthony still looks good, but it's tough for him to get to 34 minutes unless you're going to take take several minutes away from Hampton. But even at 30 to 32 minutes at 7K, I think he looks reasonable. That's where I would get first. The rest of those guys, I think, are impacted by what I was just saying. Like, I think that if Suggs plays well, you could see him close one or both halves. But at the same time, I'm not really convinced that gets you more than like 24 minutes anyway, for as long as they're running this many guys in the rotation.
And on the other side of the game, they are taking on the Philadelphia 76ers. A couple of key talking points here. By the way, Adam, we just got an ownership update about 2 minutes ago. So if you do want to check out those numbers just to see what they look like. One thing that stands out to me, Tobias Harris is one of the more popular plays on DraftKings today. And then we've got Tyrese Maxey, one of the more popular plays on FanDuel. Both of them have been priced down a little bit as of late. Obviously, we're going to pay up for somebody. There's never an issue with Joel Embiid. Embiid, a usage rate of nearly 40% over the last month. But first, what do you make of Tobias Harris being chalk on DK and Tyrese Maxey being chalk on FanDuel?
Yeah, so I mean, Harris is 6,700. I mean, that's a pretty absurd price tag for someone that averages between like 1 and 1.05 DraftKings points per minute this season. If the game's close, you should expect Harris to play 35, 36 minutes. He only played 25 last game, but just kind of a weird rotation there, dealt with some foul trouble. Had an abbreviated stint to open the third quarter. We know what you know what you're getting rotation wise, at least from Harris typically, and it's 35, 36 minutes of greater than 1 fantasy point per minute. Maxey on FanDuel, I think, makes sense. Like, he's another one where we've seen all year long that when Philadelphia is somewhat shorthanded in the backcourt, and here you're still missing Shake Milton, you're still missing Danny Green, you're missing Matisse Thybulle on the wing as well. They've relied on Maxey to play heavy minutes. He played like 33 minutes last game, lost a few minutes to garbage time in their blowout loss to the Wizards. I think it's likely you're getting 34 to 36 minutes from Maxey here.
And then as for Embiid as a pay-up option, I mean, neither of us are going to have any issue getting to Embiid. I guess the bigger overarching question for a 13-game slate, though, is how high of a priority for you is Joel Embiid as a spend-up option compared to some of the other guys we have to pay up for today?
Right. Like, it just gets really difficult because Embiid obviously looks great. This is a really good matchup. The price tag is fine. Like you said, the usage rate's been massive recently. He's playing really, really well. But Jokic is playing today. James Harden is playing today without Kevin Durant. Giannis is playing today. LeBron is playing today. And he's back to being a point guard small forward on DraftKings, which is nice. So, like, Embiid is fine. He's only projected for 8% ownership, which is cool. But we also only have him with like a 5% chance of being in the optimal lineup because you kind of just have two things working against him. In that, one, he's center only, so there's fewer roster spots that you can roster him at. And then two, he's also like, so when you compare him to his position, there's a really high opportunity cost. And then when you compare him to his salary range, as good as he is, he doesn't look like anywhere near the best option.
Yeah, and then as for the other guys on this team, I'm on the same page with you as Embiid. I project him fairly well. The usage rate is, I may be under projecting his usage just because it's hard to give him exactly what it's been as late. He's taking all the shots in the world for Philly. But that aside, there's so many other options to pay up for that it's hard for me to make him a priority today. I have other guys projected higher than him. I assume the answer to this is no, but anything else that's really of interest to you from the other role players on Philly?
Not particularly on a slate this big. I mean, Korkmaz is 4,300, should play 28 to 30 minutes somewhere in there, but you're probably going to be able to find better value on a 13-game slate with guys missing for COVID.
Yeah, that's where I'm at as well. And moving on to the next game, the Brooklyn Nets at the Washington Wizards. So from the Nets side of the game, no Kevin Durant. That's going to be the case for an extended period of time now, 4 to 6 weeks. He's going to be out with an MCL injury. So as a result, more usage going to James Harden, more usage going to Kyrie Irving, road game, which means we do have Kyrie in the mix today. Between Harden and Irving, which of them is the priority for you, or is it just get exposure to both of them?
I think it's both. I think they both look really good. Obviously we don't have much of a sample size this year of what they're going to do without Durant, and we don't have much of a sample size at all because we didn't get a huge sample last year either. But 9,300 for Kyrie, like, we know the playing time should be there. He played 38 minutes last game against Cleveland. There's no concern about a minutes restriction. So you're probably looking at 37, 38 minutes from Kyrie, like 40 for Harden. Harden's priced up a bit. Kyrie's still very reasonable. So I think they just both look like two of the top options today.
And as for the other guys on the team on the injury report, we've got DeAndre Bembry. He is questionable. Joe Harris remains out. Nick Claxton is out. Paul Millsap is out. So there is opportunity for extended minutes to be going in the front court. Day'Ron Sharpe, he's been a good fantasy producer. The minutes have been so hard to project for some of these guys. But Sharpe is fairly cheap. Aldridge is pretty cheap. Kessler Edwards, he could play extended minutes. Who is the cheap guy, or are there multiple cheap guys that you think make for good tournament options from the Nets due to some of the role players being out?
I think it's just kind of like mixing through a lot of them because I never feel that confident in going to any of these guys. When you talk about Day'Ron Sharpe, he's a very, very good point per minute producer. You have Claxton out, you have Millsap out, but then you have Aldridge not on the injury report. So, who knows? The last game you got 24 minutes from Sharp, you got 23 from Aldridge. I would expect a similar split here, in which case they both look like pretty good plays. Obviously wouldn't play them together. Kessler Edwards at 4,300 looks fine. Patty Mills looks okay. It's just outside of Harden and Kyrie, I never find it particularly easy to trust anyone on the Nets, but they are still cheap enough, those peripheral pieces, that they offer plenty of upside.
Yeah, and I would like to say let the starting lineup guide you, but I've made that mistake with the Nets before too, where it's like, hey, look, Davion Sharp is starting. He must be the priority. And then like, oh, look, cool. He played 6 minutes in the first half. So I agree with your outlook here, which is there's upside. The three guys that I look at as having upside is Davion Sharp, LaMarcus Aldridge, and Kessler Edwards. But I don't want to be crazy high on any of them, nor could I really prioritize one or the other, because we've seen how Steve Nash runs these rotations before, and it's, guesswork kind of. He's rolling the dice and being like, oh, this guy's going to play minutes. It's very inconsistent, hard to project.
Like when you think through the center rotation, like if you get the same center rotation you got last game, they both look good because Davion Sharp is a fantasy monster. LaMarcus Aldridge is good, especially he's been better this year off the bench. They would both look pretty good. The concern is when Davion Sharp first started with Claxton out, he played the same 24 minutes, and it was like, okay, cool, like we can feel good about that. And then going into the next game, they were just like, oh, by the way, we're gonna run a 3-man center rotation with Sharp, Griffin, Millsap. Obviously today it's not gonna be Millsap, but Blake Griffin last game played a total of 17 minutes. He was playing alongside Sharp, so that was good to see. But are they gonna do that again, or do they throw another body into the rotation and then say, for example, James Johnson didn't play last game. Do they give James Johnson whatever minutes they need filled alongside Sharp and then say, oh, we're going to give Blake Griffin 8 minutes at center and go 20-28 between them, in which case they all kind of suck. So Steve Nash has just been incredibly inconsistent with his rotations. And then also one more thing, I pulled it up while you were talking, 20 total games since the start of last season where Kyrie and Harden have both been active with Durant inactive. 1.39 DraftKings points per minute for Kyrie, 1.55 for Harden. So just makes them both look very good.
Yeah, for sure. Even cash games, tournaments, I wouldn't prioritize playing them together in tournaments. I think that's probably something that's going to be hard to maximize upside on a 13-game slate. But individually, certainly, I think both of them have upside and are fairly high priority plays. I don't feel the same way about the other side of this game with the Washington Wizards, because we've got a lot of these guys priced up for when Bradley Beal was out. Kuzma's more expensive, though. Kyle Kuzma, this dude's the second coming at this point. He's been unreal over the last month or so. But Bradley Beal's back in the picture. That certainly has to reduce the overall just production we see from Kyle Kuzma. Less usage there. Spencer Dinwiddie, same situation. He's priced up a little bit from the time without Bradley Beal. But then Beal's been a little bit underwhelming from a fantasy standpoint as well. So I'm looking at it this way. 13-game slate, we're getting a key player back in the picture. The pricing hasn't really adjusted. Nothing I really like from the Washington Wizards, and the front court situation's a mess as well.
Yeah, there's nothing that really stands out to me. This team is, I think last game was actually the first game this year where they've been entirely healthy. And you saw Denny Avdia not even in the rotation. So it's just really tough to prioritize these guys. Like you can certainly still make a case for Kuzma at 7,800. He's been rebounding out of his mind. He's playing more aggressively offensively. So you've seen an increased usage rate, but still he's this is like the worst possible situation for him as far as Dinwiddie being active, Beal being active, and 4 different centers essentially being active. And he's still relatively expensive. So if you want to take tournament shots at guys like that, it's fine. But on this slate, there's just no way you can prioritize that.
Let's move on to the next game. Washington Wizards, certainly not going to be a priority. And that's also 13-game NBA slate. We don't really need to look too much at players that are just fairly priced. There's going to be a lot of players that are underpriced to really prioritize. Next team to talk about here is the Portland Trailblazers. And this is another team that I think the fantasy upside has been there in the past in a lot of games, because we've seen Damian Lillard's been out, Larry Nance has been out, Norman Powell, he remains doubtful, Cody Zeller's out. But here's the issue now. Anthony Simon's priced up. CJ McCollum's back in the mix, and I assume some sort of light minutes restriction is still in play. Yusuf Nurkic is priced up. There's nothing here that I could really get to reliably on a 13-game slate, because I don't have anybody projected particularly well on a points per dollar basis.
Yeah, like Nurkic, I think is the most interesting to me because the front court is still shorthanded. He played 35 and a half minutes last game. The game before that, he played like 30, but was in foul trouble. I think you could still get, 34 to 36 minutes from Nurkic, who averages 1.25 DraftKings points per minute. But the price has adjusted. I mean, 8,700, you don't have much of a margin for error there. Then you factor in the opportunity cost of the position. You move off of that, and Simons at 7,400 doesn't look nearly as good with McCollum back. Little is like okay, but don't really like him that much on this slate. McCollum, I think, is mildly interesting at 8K. He played 28 minutes last game. If you told me he got to like 32 or 34 today, that would be kind of interesting just because of Lillard being out. But again, that's a lot of question marks, and I don't think you really have to go too crazy with guys that have question marks today.
And something else to consider is it's a very difficult matchup because on the other side of the game, Miami, they went through a little bit of a rough stretch, but keep in mind, Jimmy Butler missed time, Bam Adebayo missed time, Kyle Lowry remains out for them. But I think the key point here is with Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo in the mix, this is a very, very difficult defense to score real life and fantasy points on. And then a lot of the same things we just said about the Portland Trailblazers getting guys back, I think it kind of applies to the Miami Heat as well, because now we've got Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo in the mix. I think both of them are okay GPP flyers, but there's nobody else I could really look at as being a good play on Miami because these guys are back in the mix. Do you see it any differently, or do you view Butler Adebayo as a primary option?
No, I don't really see it any differently. I do like the price tag for Adebayo on DraftKings at 7,700. He played about 32 minutes last game, which was good to see. He was coming back from a thumb injury, so the fact that he was able to just get right back out there and play suggests that I don't expect him to be too limited. He's averaged 1.15 DraftKings points per minute in his games with Butler this year. So he does, I think, look a little bit underpriced in a good matchup here, but still, difficult to point to any just mid-range center on a healthy team on a slate like this and say he's a huge priority. Butler at small forward, 9,100, certainly fine, but I'm with you. Like a lot of these peripheral guys have lost some value. I guess one other, again, it shouldn't matter too much on this slate, but Duncan Robinson did move into the starting lineup yesterday or last game. His salary dropped to 3,800. He still only played 17 and a half minutes. If you want to take a tournament shot there, and if Duncan Robinson's knocking down his threes, he's going to play more than 17 minutes.
Yeah, and by the way, RIP to Omer Yurtseven, who absolutely crushed when Bam Adebayo was out. Bam Adebayo comes back, and Yurtseven just falls out of the rotation.
That's crazy. I did not think Dedmon was going to be the backup.
Yeah, the Heat are so good at drafting and developing players. It's ridiculous. And Yurtseven, if I remember correctly, was an undrafted player, and it seems like he's going to have real value. Something they found with other guys. Tyler Hero is a mid-first round pick. Bam Adebayo was a mid-first round pick. Duncan Robinson, he was somebody who is not really well regarded coming out of college. So they do a ridiculous job of developing and finding young players. So just shout out to Omer Yurtseven for crushing when Bam Adebayo was out, and then not being able to find himself in the rotation now that Adebayo is back. Moving on, the Charlotte Hornets at the Boston Celtics. From the Charlotte side of the game, Kelly Oubre is questionable. If he is back, that really throws a monkey wrench into everything we've seen from the Charlotte Hornets as of late, because we've seen guys like Miles Bridges. Well, Miles Bridges also went crazy last game because LaMelo Ball, he was not on the injury report, but then not starting. There was reports that, LaMelo Ball is going to play off the bench, never ends up entering the game, but he should be good to go for today. But that aside, if Kelly Oubre is back in the mix, that takes away minutes and usage from guys like Miles Bridges. Gordon Hayward makes a lot of the role players also difficult to get to. Charlotte, another team I don't find particularly appealing today.
Same here, because essentially what happens is, like in the last game that the Hornets played with Ball in, Ish Smith played 6.5 minutes off the bench. If Kelly Oubre comes back, Ish Smith becomes Kelly Oubre, and Kelly Oubre is playing more than 6 minutes off the bench. So you basically go from Hayward, Rozier, Bridges playing, like 40 minutes apiece to Rozier and Hayward probably playing 32 to 34, Bridges probably playing 34 or 35, Ball probably playing like 32 to 34 if he avoids foul trouble. Cody Martin and Jalen McDaniels lose some minutes. It just makes them not as appealing. That's not to say you can't, that you still don't have a high ceiling from guys like Bridges and Ball, but nowhere near as appealing if we assume Kelly Oubre's in.
Yeah, and then something else, LaMelo Ball does have a more favorable price point on FanDuel than DraftKings. He's only 8,200. He's projected for 4% ownership. I don't mind being overweight to that number, but once again, there's a lot of guys to pay up for. And if Kelly Oubre is indeed back, it's going to take some shots away from LaMelo Ball. But how do you view LaMelo at an 8,200 price tag on FanDuel when he's only projected for 4% ownership? Does that change at all for you?
I mean, I like him there, but I think it's all relative because I know you have some other crazy prices on point guards there. For example, like LaMelo is 8,200, Russell Westbrook is
75.
7,500. So, like when you start getting stuff like that, it's still it's all relative. Like I think that's why the ownership is where it is. LaMelo is certainly still a good tournament play, has a very high ceiling, but I mean Fred VanVleet's $300 more, Darius Garland's $500 more. So it's kind of all relative, I think.
Yeah, and that's something I was stunned by that at first when I was just opening up Fantasy Cruncher before we were doing the show, and I'm building some lineups. I'm trying to get a feel for how stuff is like. Oh, look, they made a mistake on Russell Westbrook's price. He's listed at 7,500. Then open up the FanDuel app just to double check. It's like, oh, Russell Westbrook actually is 7,500 today on FanDuel, which is just a crazy price tag. We'll be talking about him later. But staying in this game, playing against the Charlotte Hornets, it is the Boston Celtics. For the Celtics, Marcus Smart has missed the last few games in the health and safety protocols. He is questionable. If he returns, that is certainly going to take Dennis Schroeder out of the mix. Schroeder's started mixed results, but has had a lot of fantasy upside as a starter. If Marcus Smart is back, how does that impact some of these other wing and guard players on the Celtics?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest impact is with Schroeder because you're talking about a game where Schroeder just played 40 and a half minutes against the Pelicans. He didn't leave the floor the entire second half. If Smart's out, you would expect at least like 32 to 34 minutes, if not more, from Schroeder at 6,400 in a really good matchup against Charlotte. That would be pretty appealing. If Smart's in, I don't think you can really expect more than 26 to 28 minutes, which makes it close to impossible to get there on Schroeder. For Smart at 5,900, like he probably plays 32 to 34, but he's not the same sort of, high upside guy, high usage guy that Schroeder is. So outside of just, low owned tournament flyers, I wouldn't really have interest in either guy.
And we also have Robert Williams coming back. He missed last game due to personal reasons. I believe it was to the birth of a child. So no real concerns there. But Al Horford, who is a really good value play on the MLK slate, I think we could kind of take him out of the mix if Robert Williams is back because Horford's minutes have been way down recently without Robert Williams. What do you make of Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, the two Jays for Boston? Are either of them players that you're really looking to get to today?
I think they're both kind of just there. Like at their price points, I don't mind getting to them. It is a good matchup for sure. It's one of the best you can get, but they just don't really stand out. From a talent standpoint, they both have the upside to do very well, but they also cut into each other's production enough. And there's enough, other mouths to feed on the team. You have Horford and Williams grabbing rebounds. You have Smart getting some assists. You have Schroeder shooting when he's on the floor. That it's tough to rely on them when they're both in.
Oh, is this true? Somebody, if it's not, it's just kind of funny, but so we had in YouTube chat here, David Iddit said that off topic, Jared Goff's son was just born. They named his son Jack. Is that true? If that is true, that's absolutely hilarious.
There's no chance that's true.
Let's see if that's actually true. I'm going to look this up. I need to know if his son is named Jack Goff. That is absolutely tremendous. But moving on to the next game on the slate, it is the Minnesota Timberwolves at the Atlanta Hawks. Really, really high total in this game, 335.5 points. That is the highest total of any game on today's slate by a couple of point margin. So keeping that in mind, Minnesota Timberwolves on the road, tail end of a back-to-back. Reasonable price points on Karl-Anthony Towns, Anthony Edwards, D'Angelo Russell. I don't know that I could call any of them guys that I want to get to in like 20+% of lineups, but considering how high the total is for this game and that Clint Capella is out for the Atlanta Hawks as well, which really hurts their defense, I think it's worth getting at least some exposure to Cat Edwards and Russell individually. How do you view the trio of stars from the Timberwolves?
Yeah, I agree with that. None of them individually stand out, but a $9,500 price tag on Cat when he could play 36 plus minutes is pretty appealing. Russell at 7,600, Edwards at 7,800. We know the kind of upside those guys have. Russell dealt with foul trouble yesterday, so he kind of let everybody down. Edwards started out really well and then struggled as well, but just pretty appealing price tags here. Even if it doesn't make them top tier plays tonight, I think that there's still guys I'll be getting to, probably in similar amounts.
Also, as a follow-up, the Jack Goff story that appears to be fake news. However, I did Google it, and there is a professional race car driver that has the name Jack Goff. So good for his parents, who are total assholes apparently for making him go through that name all through middle school and high school. I'm sure that went well for him. Some of the other cheaper players from the Minnesota Timberwolves. I saw some people mentioning Jalen Noel in the YouTube chat earlier. Patrick Beverley, he's had a little bit of upside as of late. Do either of them stand out to you as value plays on the cheaper end?
Beverly's somewhat interesting. I mean, he's only 5,200. You should get 28 to 30 minutes from him if he can avoid fouling. He's been like a point per minute guy this year. So I think he's fine. I don't anticipate going back to Noel at least too much today. His salary did drop $500, which is kind of nice. He's a high usage, like high upside guy, but you still can only really count on him getting like 20 to 22 minutes. And on a slate like this, you probably are going to find better value. Last night, he was one of my highest owned guys on DraftKings because he was like 7% owned and was a really high usage guy that could get more run and then ended up getting there, but just not as much of a need to take shots on guys like that tonight.
Yeah, and something else to point out about the Timberwolves Knicks game yesterday, Karl-Anthony Towns had 4 personal fouls. Patrick Beverley had 5 personal fouls. D'Angelo Russell had 4 personal fouls, including 3 personal fouls in the first quarter. Jaden McDaniels had 4 personal fouls. Jared Vanderbilt had 4 personal fouls. Everybody was in foul trouble. So look at Jalen Noel's minutes yesterday. I don't think it's something that we're going to see again. It was very much predicated on that foul trouble, and he still only played 23 minutes. So it's hard for me to project him for, significantly more than 20, and even 20 might be a little bit of a stretch. So I think most likely we see him play minutes in the high teens. And if he's going to be somebody picks up any kind of ownership based on recent box scores, I'd rather just kind of go elsewhere. On the other side of the game, the Atlanta Hawks, who have one of the highest individual team totals on the slate, they're without Bogdan Bogdanovic. They're without Clint Capella. So that in mind, this does look like one of the real true value spots where you can find cheap guys to really look at today. First guy to talk about here, I think, is Onyeka Okongwu, who I think is one of the best points per dollar plays on the slate. Do you see it any differently?
No, I agree. I mean, we've I guess already seen the downside case for Okongwu where he starts and then plays poorly and gets like quasi benched and only plays 24 minutes. But at 4,600, he still looks pretty good. He is only a center on DraftKings, which when he first cracked the starting lineup, he was a power forward as well. On FanDuel, he's also only a center, so that does hurt him, but still makes him look like a good value. He's a pretty good points per minute guy when he's out there. He played 35 minutes last game. It's just a matter of can he not play himself off the floor, but he is going to get the first chance. He's averaged 0.96 DraftKings points per minute this year. It's not a bad matchup. I mean, there should be a lot of scoring in this game. So I think Okongwu does look like a very good value.
And I get that he's center eligible, that he's only center eligible, but he's a pretty good points per minute fantasy producer. And like you said, as long as he stays out of foul trouble, I think he's going to play a pretty healthy amount of minutes. We saw him play 36 minutes in his last start. So I think he's going way under owned right now. We have him projected for 15% ownership on DraftKings. On FanDuel, he is projected for, let's see, I saw him, 9% ownership. Those are really low numbers for somebody who I think if he stays out of foul trouble, we're looking at mid-30s minutes from him as a points per minute fantasy producer. So I think he's getting a little bit overlooked. Do you think the ownership is fair, or do you agree that he's probably should be higher owned?
I think he probably should be higher owned. I'm not quite as bullish on his playing time as you are. Like 36, I think, is on the table, or mid-30s is on the table. But I think that there's still multiple ways he ends up with like 30, whether it's just, different units playing better or he gets in foul trouble or something like that. I don't feel comfortable just like straight up projecting him for 36 minutes, but definitely on the table. I think I'll end up at like a 30 to 32 minute projection. But either way, like you said, you're talking around a fantasy point per minute guy. If you give him 30 to 32 minutes at 4,600, he's going to look like a fantastic value. And Gorgie Jang didn't play at all last game. So, I mean, you're back to the rotation we'd gotten previously where it's Okongwu backed up by John Collins.
Yeah, and the other thing that was weird is we did have that one game where Jang randomly started over Okongwu and now just out of the rotation entirely. There is value to be had on the wings here as well. The Hawks, to me, one of the best teams to target on the slate because, like I mentioned, in addition to no Clint Capella, Bogdan Bogdanovic remains out for this team. So Kevin Huerter, DeAndre Hunter, Danilo Gallinari, all of these guys I think are underpriced and all make for pretty good points per dollar plays. Do any of them stand out higher above the other ones to you?
I think Young looks really good. 9,800 is a cheap price tag for him. We know, like, obviously he's going to get plenty of Patrick Beverley. That's not something I'm particularly concerned about. Like if he plays poorly, I'm sure people will say, oh, you shouldn't have played Trae Young because Pat Beverley exists. And if he plays well, people will just not say anything. I don't really care about individual defense like that. I care a lot more about the possessions that are going to be available in this game. And Young looks great. He gets tons of assists as well. I really like the 7K price tag on Collins too, because if we assume that we're getting the same rotation that we did last game, you're talking about a lot of minutes at center for Collins. And he wasn't in the closing lineup in that game. I don't really know why. I think it's just because Gallo was playing well in the fourth quarter. But I assume you're going to get 32 minutes or so on average from Collins, with like 14 of those minutes or something, 12 to 16, I guess, as the backup center, which is appealing. DeAndre Hunter at 4,200 should play a bunch of minutes. Not the best fantasy producer, but should still play a lot. I'm interested in all of those guys. You can throw Gallo in the mix too. I would say you don't want more than two of Okongwu, Collins, and Gallinari for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable way to look at it. And somebody in YouTube chat had asked a question about Okongwu relative to LaMarcus Aldridge. And here's why I have Okongwu. For me personally, why I project Okongwu higher. I think Okongwu, his minutes upside is way higher than LaMarcus Aldridge's, because Okongwu just played 36 minutes last game, assuming that Jeng is out of the rotation. I just don't see a way that LaMarcus Aldridge gets to that much playing time. Is Aldridge better than Okongwu? Yes, but I just have to personally give Okongwu way more minutes. But just kind of as a follow-up on that, because I do think it's an interesting talking point, Adam. If you could only roster one of Okongwu or Aldridge, which way would you go?
I would go Okongwu, but I will add on to that. If we're assuming Okongwu starts and Aldridge comes off the bench. So in that case, it becomes really difficult to see how their minutes end up being similar outside of Aldridge plays 24 and Okongwu gets benched or gets in foul trouble and plays 24 also. If Aldridge were to start ahead of Sharp, I think you could see Aldridge get like 28 to 30 minutes. And I've already said that I think you could see like 30 minutes for Okongwu here. So that would make them more comparable. But yeah, I mean, I think Okongwu pretty easily projects ahead of Aldridge. I do think it's an interesting spot to pay attention to ownership. Like hypothetically, if as we get closer to lock, let's say Okongwu is like 30% and Aldridge is like 7% or something. That's something, it still becomes really interesting because you could still get the Okongwu foul game with Aldridge playing well or something like that. But just talking in terms of who looks better, I think it's pretty tough to expect similar playing time from Aldridge as you can get from Okongwu.
Yeah, and one thing also to mention is that right now Aldridge projected for 7% ownership on DK, Okongwu at 15%, but on FanDuel, Aldridge, mostly because he has power forward eligibility as well as center eligibility, he's projected for 19% ownership, whereas Okongwu is projected for 9% ownership. So Okongwu more popular on DK, Aldridge more popular on FanDuel. So take that for what it's worth. By the way, also our ownership rankings, free content today over on Awesemo.com if you want to check those out. Next game to talk about. Do you think
Gorgie Jang will be in the rotation since he's playing his former team?
No. Okay. I mean, he could, if he's in the rotation, it's not going to be because he's playing his former team. If he's in the rotation, it's just going to be because the Hawks do weird things with their center rotations all the time. Like Jeng starting 2 games ago and then being out of the rotation the next game.
Yeah.
But
starting and still only playing 12 minutes.
Yeah, after I late swapped onto a lot of them. But yeah, so that particular situation, no, I don't think it'll be impacted by him playing his former team. Is that something you consider at all?
No, I just saw it in chat.
Okay, yeah. Well, good enough talking point, and I understand why it gets brought up. But yeah,
it has happened before. Like you've seen a coach say, "Oh, well, I just wanted to get him a few minutes for whatever, blah blah blah." But it's not a spot that strikes me as that happening.
Yeah, and once again, could he play? Yeah, but I don't think it's related to who the Hawks are playing with. If it does, it's just going to be because of they think it makes sense because of the matchup, or maybe Okongwu gets in foul trouble guarding Karl-Anthony Towns and they're forced to play Jeng. That's the situation. I think it's most likely that Jeng gets minutes is Okongwu gets in foul trouble guarding Karl-Anthony Towns.
I don't. Is he even going to guard Towns though? Like normally teams use their 4. And I
guess it could be Collins get in foul trouble too, and then Jeng could have to play minutes.
Like, I mean, I think Gallinari is the first one to benefit either way. But to your point, like, yeah, Jeng could step on the floor. It doesn't matter for much of any of this unless they just decide like he's playing full rotations for some reason.
Yeah, and I'm not playing Jeng no matter what. Well, I guess if he starts, but I don't think that's going to be the case. Either way, not someone I'm going to be getting exposure to. Somebody you are going to have to get exposure to is DeAnthony Melton. Next game we have to talk about is the Memphis Grizzlies.
My favorite.
Yeah, your favorite?
I love DeAnthony Melton.
I love DeAnthony Melton too, but traditionally doesn't like DeAnthony Melton, the
His
Memphis
coach.
Grizzlies.
Yeah.
Because there's always these situations where we all want to play DeAnthony Melton. He's a great fantasy producer, lots of upside. There are random games where DeAnthony Melton's like, oh, cool, look, he played 18 minutes and scored 38 DraftKings points.
Yeah. He won me
And
50K already in one of those games this year. It was fun.
yeah, and then you think like, oh, look, there's guys out for Memphis. We have to play DeAnthony Melton, and somehow he just doesn't end up playing minutes. But for today, Desmond Bane is out, Killian Tilly's out, Dylan Brooks is out, Kyle Anderson's out. This has to be a spot where DeAnthony Melton plays extended minutes. He's reasonably priced on DraftKings. He's reasonably priced on FanDuel. As a result, 4,100 on FanDuel, project for 42% ownership. 3,700 on DraftKings, project for 45.6% ownership. The most popular play on the slate on DK and FanDuel. How do you look at DeAnthony Melton relative to his ownership?
I have a really hard time not liking him. He's just such a good point per minute guy. And even when you account for like lower rates playing alongside John Morant, you also can just expect more minutes, and it helps offset it. So like this year, we did get a decent sample of him starting with Morant back at the beginning of the year when Brooks was out. So he has started 12 games with John Morant. He's averaged 0.91 DraftKings points per minute, which isn't great. I mean, it's not as good as he normally is, but it's still not bad. But he's also averaged 27.9 minutes per game in those games. So if you give me 28 to 30 minutes of Melton at like 0.9 DraftKings points per minute at 3,700, he's still going to look good.
Yeah, I find him really hard to get away. Have to play him in cash games. No way around it. You're playing cash games today. You're playing DeAnthony Melton on FanDuel and DraftKings. Tournaments, I still think I'm going to be overweight to the field, even with him being in about half the field's lineups, because it's really difficult to not project him well. And maybe something happens later in the slate where just a crazy amount of more value opens up. But as of right now, I think the chalk on DeAnthony Melton and the chalk on the Utah Jazz players that we're going to talk about later, I think it's justified. As for other players on Memphis, is there anybody else that you think really benefits that you want to get to with all these players out?
I think the low-owned pivot off of Melton is Tyus Jones. I think that Melton probably gets the first crack, but we have seen Jones play minutes alongside Morant when they've been shorthanded in the backcourt this year. It wouldn't be the most surprising thing if they decide that they want Tyus Jones in there down the stretch instead of Melton. Would not be the first time they've decided they wanted anybody instead of Melton. So that's kind of interesting to me, where you have $3,700 Melton getting 46% ownership. You have $3,900 Jones getting 6%. That's a pretty interesting one. But outside of that, I don't think a whole lot stands out here in the context of the slate. I still like getting to an $8,900 John Morant. I guess I should mention him as standing out. He's been fantastic without Dylan Brooks this year. Now you also take out Desmond Bane, you take out Kyle Anderson. It's just going to be Morant doing everything he possibly can at only 8,900. So I would say that Morant is my favorite of the like normal guys. Melton looks like the best value. I like Jones as a tournament pivot away from Melton in some lineups. Other than that, if you get to a little bit of Jaren Jackson, a little bit of Steven Adams, they look fine. But I think the priorities here are Melton and Morant.
So for me, kind of the same logic, but I prefer John Conchar as a pivot instead of DeAnthony Melton. We've seen some upside from Conchar, and the minutes have also kind of already been there for him. So Conchar recent games, 23 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And that one game last week against the Minnesota Timberwolves, he scored over 40 fantasy points in those 30 minutes overall for the season. For John Conchar, he's playing 17 minutes per game, averaging 14 and a half DraftKings points. I agree with you. I think the Tyus Jones makes sense as a pivot, but I also like Conchar as a pivot. Do you have any opinion on him as somebody to roster to get off of Melton?
Sorry, I got confused because Chris sent us a message and never mind. Yeah. So you'll see it in a second. You'll see what I'm talking about. But no, I'm with you on Conchar. I think that's a good call as well. It actually wouldn't be shocking if Conchar starts instead of Melton, just knowing what Memphis does. So either way, like 3,600 off the bench, that's another one where if you're not getting to Melton, Conchar makes some sense as well. Like when you think about the closing lineup, it's going to be, assuming this game's competitive, Adams should be out there. Morant's going to be out there. You assume Jaren Jackson's probably going to be out there as long as he hasn't fouled out. So basically you have two spots going to Conchar, Jones, Melton, Williams, maybe Brandon Clark if they play him alongside Steven Adams. So I think that sort of just mixing in any of those guys at lower ownership than Melton makes some sense.
By the way, you should have just said yes to Chris's message and just rolled with it. So for just so people know what we're talking about, we had Alex who's not able to do the deeper dive today, and we're mixing up the schedule. And there was a typo where it said in our Slack chat that Adam wasn't able to do the show, and Adam corrected it. But Adam could have had himself a free day off without doing anything.
Well, I got really excited when I read it. I was like, Adam needs off the deep dive day, and I was like, oh, what am I doing this afternoon? Like, I feel like I'm forgetting.
Well, instead, it is going to be you're going to be doing the deeper dive with Eric later in the day, and I'll be doing live before lock with Terry. Guys, do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel when you know that the rest of our content is coming up. And Adam should probably be subscribed too, so he knows when he's going to be on shows, because that's something that could benefit all of us right now. Anything else from Memphis here worth talking about? I feel like we've kind of covered it all.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's it. From a group standpoint, I don't really want Clark and Adams together. I don't think. I mean, they could play alongside each other, but on a slate this big, I would rather just have one or the other. The Conchar, Zaire Williams, like Tyus Jones group, I probably only want one of them.
And on the Milwaukee side of the game, Drew Holiday is questionable to play. If he comes back, it does have a pretty big impact on Giannis Antetokounmpo. Obviously, Giannis is a terrific points per minute fantasy producer, no matter what the situation is. But he does play a little extra minutes on average in games that Drew Holiday is out. So it's not that Giannis is unplayable if Drew plays, but he does become slightly less appealing. How do you view the Milwaukee Bucks as a whole if Drew Holiday returns?
I think it actually doesn't matter that much to me, I guess, because the way I see it is if Holiday were out, guys like Grayson Allen at 4,100 are like sort of just mediocre flyer type plays. George Hill, started last game, played 31 minutes. He's only 3,100. That would be okay, but he's still not a great fantasy producer. So Holiday coming back, it's not like it takes any like top end plays off the board. It kind of just, knocks guys like that down. Middleton looks similar one way or the other. Giannis benefits from Holiday being out, but the biggest reason he benefits is an increase in playing time, more so than an increase in rates. And in this game against Memphis, I mean, it is a shorthanded Memphis team, but still only 6-point favorites from Milwaukee. I would still think there's a pretty decent chance that Giannis plays 34 minutes or so, even if Drew is in, just because the game is competitive. So I'm not really downgrading much outside of those like peripheral type guys if Holiday's in.
The NBA Strategy Show is sponsored by Prize Picks. If you guys are new or unfamiliar with Prize Picks, head on over to the site. Sign up for the first time using the promo code Awesemo. Get to a $100 bonus on your first deposit. Also, when you're signing up at Prize Picks for the first time using that promo code, you get 1 free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. You find all the tools you need to make money in DFS. And also, we have tools that are really helpful for Prize Picks. Prize Picks is a prop-based DFS site. They have over-unders for fantasy points. It's the same scoring as FanDuel. So you could look at those and you could find the best over-unders for fantasy points by looking at our FanDuel projections. Also, if you go to OddShopper, free to use over at Awesemo.com, and there you'll find all our projections, over-unders for props. It's useful for Prize Picks, also useful for sports betting, which is obviously becoming legalized in a lot of states right now. So check out OddShopper if you want access to free tools to help you place some prop bets. Moving on with the rest of this slate, the next game to talk about is the Cleveland Cavaliers, who are kind of surprising road favorites over the Chicago Bulls. I know Chicago's shorthanded, but still Cleveland's going to be favored in this spot. That aside, I don't really think there's a whole lot to see here from Cleveland. Darius Garland's been priced up. Jared Allen and Evan Mobley have both been solid, but there's a lot of good points per dollar pricing on the slate, and these guys are just all kind of appropriately priced.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I still don't mind getting to like some Garland in tournaments. He's just really, really good, especially without Sexton and Rubio on the floor. You can obviously take shots at a $7,700 Jared Allen as well. But I agree, more so just like tournament options than guys that stand out as clear top values here.
Yeah, and not really anything else that I think we need to be talking about from the Cleveland side of the game. Is there anything else here that you think is for a good talking point? If not, in the interest of time, I think we could move on and not talk about mediocre plays.
Yeah, no, that's pretty much what I see.
All right. So then from the Chicago side of the game, Javonte Green is out. Zach LaVine is out. Lonzo Ball is out. Derek Jones is out. That is opening up extra playing time, extra usage from Chicago. So guys like Ayo Dosunmu, he's been playing extended minutes. However, Alex Caruso is coming back. I think that's going to cut into Dosunmu's playing time. So the guys that I'm looking at the most is going to be Vooch and DeMar DeRozan. How do you think Alex Caruso coming back affects Kobe White and Dosunmu?
Yeah, I mean, it should cut into their minutes. I don't know, how restricted Caruso will be coming back, but it makes me think you're not getting 38 minutes from Dosunmu. It makes me think that actually you still probably get 30 or so from White. Um, I would think that like the closing lineup now ends up being White, Caruso, DeRozan. I feel like I'm
Vooch.
forgetting somebody still.
Vooch.
Yeah, but they still need a fifth guy, so it could still be Dosunmu. Yeah,
So
so
it,
Caruso is probably replacing McKinney, is my guess. And
yeah,
then and then I would think that you probably get um like less playing time for Dosunmu just because McKinney probably plays off the bench. But I guess the closing lineup probably still does contain Dosunmu.
yeah,
Or whoever's
it's
playing better. It's probably whoever's playing the best out of Brown, Dosunmu, and McKinney.
yeah, and Dosunmu is massively different looking on FanDuel compared to DraftKings. He's been priced up to 5,800 on DK, which to me I think is a kind of unplayable price tag. But what do you make of him only being 4,200 on FanDuel? Does that still make him viable even with Caruso back?
I still don't really want to get there. Like he's averaged 0.66 FanDuel points per minute this year. Obviously, if anybody's playing, like if anybody that has a chance to play 36 minutes at 4,200, they have some inherent value just because being on the floor, they can have a big game, kind of like Tony Snell accepted, I guess. But still, 0.66 FanDuel points per minute on a 13 game slate. I think you're just going to find better options.
And then Vooch and DeRozan, how do you view them in terms of priority plays when there's no Zach LaVine, no Lonzo Ball? So extra usage to go around to the two stars remaining in Chicago.
Yeah, I think it makes them both look really good. It's not a great matchup against Cleveland, but they've both averaged like 1.2 to 1.25 DraftKings points per minute in the handful of games they've played without LaVine this year. They're both reasonably priced with DeRozan at 9,200 and Vooch at 9K. They both just look like good plays to me.
All right, so we can move on to the next game then, which is the Oklahoma City Thunder at the San Antonio Spurs. Not very many games that the Spurs will be 6.5-point favorites, but that will happen when they are playing against the Oklahoma City Thunder. So from the Thunder side of the game, we've got SGA, we've got Josh Giddey, Lou Dort have all been pretty good fantasy producers this year. Hard to prioritize them on this particular slate. 6,500 on FanDuel for Giddey in this matchup. I think that looks appealing. Other than that, these are guys who, hey, if I have the salary and this is a final spot on the roster to fill, I'm okay with getting to them. But nothing here that I feel like I need to be rostering.
Yeah, that's typically how I see OKC. The highest owned guys on DraftKings right now are Giddey and Dort at like 12%. I think that looks fine. SGA, we know, has a high ceiling at 8,400, but nothing that really stands out. Baisley at 4,500 started last game. So he's been playing well off the bench, and then they moved him back into the starting lineup last game. Off the top of my head, I don't actually know how he did, but assuming he starts, that would be a benefit for his playing time, or at least his playing time projection, and probably a little bit of a hit for his production. He played 19 minutes, didn't really do anything. So probably a decent chance he goes back to the bench today. But either way, at 4,500, he's someone that you could certainly take shots at as well.
So let's move on to the Spurs side of the game, where really weird situation with Derek White last game, where he's working his way back from the health and safety protocols. He had COVID, so he has a minutes restriction the first game. Second game, we see Greg Popovich come out before the game, come to the media and say, hey, Derek White, not exactly sure what we're going to do with his minutes, but we're not going to start him today. So live before lock, and Josh and I are trying to figure out, like, okay, and it was a smaller slate. It was important. We're trying to figure out who are the Spurs going to start if Derek White isn't in the starting lineup. We couldn't really figure it out. Starting lineup doesn't come out. Game starts. Derek White is starting. Greg Popovich, dirty, filthy liar, like most NBA coaches. But now that we could just assume Derek White is going to be back in the mix as a starter, I kind of like him in this spot against the Oklahoma City Thunder. He's priced down a little bit, $6,200 over on DK. On FanDuel, $7,100, a little bit more pricey, but still, this is a guy who, even with DeJounte Murray in the lineup, he was priced close to 8K not all that long ago. So I like getting to Derek White here. Anything else stand out to you from the Spurs, or do you also like Derek White?
Also like Derek White, just looks like a solid value. Played about 30 minutes last game, lost a couple minutes to garbage time. For the season, he's played 34 games with DeJounte Murray active. He's averaged 1 DraftKings point per minute and 30.8 minutes per game. Prior to his absence, he was actually playing a little bit better as well. But even if you just assume that 1 fantasy point per minute, production and call it 30 to 32 minutes, he's just looks like a high floor relatively high ceiling play at 6,200. I still like Murray as well. His salary's come down, and he's not as good with Derek White, but he's still very, very, very good. It's just kind of, like he goes from 1.37 DraftKings points per minute with White this year to averaging, I think, 1.45 or 1.5 fantasy points per minute when White is not on the floor. So you're still talking about a very, very good producer in a good matchup against OKC. I like both of those guys a lot.
And then any of the other role players stand out to you? Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson. Keldon Johnson, I think, also somebody else with a pretty favorable price point. He's back in the starting rotation. No real concern with his minutes. He was coming off the bench and had limited minutes for a minute because he was coming back from COVID. Doesn't seem to be an issue anymore. So I think Vassell is a lower priority play, but Keldon Johnson is somebody else who I legitimately like in mid-range.
Jack off in chat said that he's 20 minutes behind, but always appreciates some name recognition. Yeah, I'm with you. Johnson looks fine. I think Jakob Poeltl looks fine as well. Poeltl, obviously, the price tag's getting up a little bit, which in and of itself isn't too much of a problem. Poeltl is still capable of throwing up some big games at 6,900, but when you start comparing it to other centers, it doesn't really stand out. And then Keldon Johnson, 5,500, I think is fine as well. So I'd say the priorities are Murray and White, but mixing in some of those two is pretty appealing too.
The next game to talk about for tonight, it is the Toronto Raptors at the Dallas Mavericks, which the total in this game, 206.5, by far the lowest total on the slate, almost 10 points lower than any other game we have to talk about today. Gary Trent is questionable, so if he's out, that could potentially open up a little bit more value. But Chris Boucher has been playing extra minutes. He's really pricey now. We did see Toronto go to a 6-man rotation basically last game. Champagny played 9 minutes. Other than that, they only played 6 dudes, though. How are you viewing? What's that?
I love Nick Nurse.
That rotation last game was so ridiculous, just pulling up some of the minutes from that game. So yeah, Champagny played 9 minutes. And other than that, we got 34 from Anunoby, 37 from Achua, 41 from Red Van Vliet, 39 from Scotty Barnes, 38 from Boucher, who had barely been playing recently. Then you get 42 from Pascal Siakam. I assume Gary Trent's back, but let's play the scenario. If Trent does not play, what could we expect from minutes from Toronto?
Yeah, I mean, if Trent doesn't play, we've seen that for several games in a row now where even prior, Toronto's been really liking these lineups where they just play basically 5, 6'7" guys. And that's why Boucher's been in the rotation more recently. You've been seeing back when Trent was in, you were going from Siakam getting minutes at the 5 to then sometimes playing minutes at the 3 and just playing very condensed rotations with these bigs. So if Trent is out, I think you once again see Achua start. I think you once again see Achua play a lot of minutes. He's only 4,400. Kem Birch is still out. It would make him look like a good value. If Trent is back, I think it's likely that Birch is playing 24 minutes or not Birch. Achua is playing 24 minutes or so off the bench, which would make him less appealing. But it would also, if Trent is back, I think it's likely that Boucher is playing mid 20s or something like that, which is pretty tough at 6,100. But if Trent is out, I think Boucher is playing low to mid 30s at least again. And at 6,100, that would be pretty appealing. Barnes and Anunoby look good one way or the other, just based on their playing time, or at least playable, I should say, based on their playing time. Van Vliet at 8,600 is actually a really good price tag, even in a game that is likely to be low scoring. We just know the upside that he offers. And then Siakam at 9,100 is reasonable as well. So even though this game is really unappealing, anybody starting for a Nick Nurse team, as long as the prices are reasonable, sort of always just carries value because he is kind of Tom Thibodeau on steroids at this point.
All right, let's appease to our guy Darryl Ward here, who was complaining. We're 2 games into this slate, and he's yelling at us for not talking about Chris Boucher at that point. We're talking about the Washington Wizards, and Darryl Ward's going, "How come you guys aren't talking about Boucher?" Well, because we don't need to talk about Boucher at every single team that comes up, but he is a little more relevant for this spot. I can't play him at 7,000 on FanDuel. Too much for me. If Gary Trent is out, then yeah, Chris Boucher at 6,100 becomes a viable GBB play because he played almost 40 minutes last game. But if Trent is back in, I just have to assume a lot of those minutes come right from Chris Boucher. But would you like Chris Boucher as a GPP option? I don't think anybody's going to like him as much as Dower Ward. Dower Ward's going to play Chris Boucher in 120% of his lineups today.
Yeah, this is kind of bizarre because I've just been playing a bunch of Chris Boucher at like 4% ownership for the last 3 or 4 games Toronto played. But yeah, if Trent is out again, I still like Boucher. 6,100 for a guy that produces at a high rate. This is a situation where someone in YouTube chat still doesn't understand that we talk about DFS here and not actual basketball. So Chris Boucher is an actual basketball player, nothing special. He's an NBA player. Yeah, he's not like a star or anything. He is a very good DFS guy. So when he gets minutes, he's a good play.
Yeah, he's also really old, which I think people don't really understand.
Yeah.
There was a point last year where the Raptors were considering trading Boucher for Andre Drummond. And people were like, how could you give up on a young player like Boucher? Well, Boucher's older than Andre Drummond, but that's neither here nor there. Chris Boucher, if Gary Trent's out, I like him as a GPP play on DK, less so on FanDuel. On the other side of the game with the Dallas Mavericks, Maxi Kleber is questionable to play. Reggie Bullock is questionable to play. Porzingis and Luka are both fine pay-up options. They're not high priorities for me, and it definitely weighs on me that the total for this game is so low at 206.5. Luka always has upside. Other guys I would prefer to pay up for today. How do you view Luka and Porzingis, and is there anybody else from Dallas that appeals to you?
Yeah, it's like Luka's never bad. It kind of feels like the point guard version of Joel Embiid, except I'd probably still like Embiid even a little bit more. But like Luka's never bad, but it's just really difficult for me to say, oh, I want to take Luka for $600 or $800 less than Harden, or I want to take Luka for $1,500 more than Kyrie. Not to mention plenty of other guys that look really good. Jokic in the same price tier, sort of. Giannis sort of in the same price tier. It's kind of just the point guard equivalent to me of Embiid, where if I see lineups with Luka in them, like I can't imagine he's not going to be low owned tonight. We have him at 7% ownership. So anytime you get to Luka at low ownership, you're fine. You shouldn't like redo your lineups or anything. But I think it's also going to be very difficult to get there. Porzingis is kind of the same thing. 7,800 is not a bad price tag on him, but only 9% ownership. Not a very appealing game, but there's upside there. It's just that there's options that I think look a little bit better.
Yeah, that's where I'm at too. It's a 13-game slate. We have basically everybody to pay up for, and unfortunately, the total for this game is so low that it does dampen the appeal of Luka Doncic just a little bit. So we can move on to the next game, and it's the Houston Rockets at the Utah Jazz. The Jazz are the premier value spot on the slate. We're going to talk about them in a second. First, on the Utah side on the Houston side of the game, it's really hard for me to prioritize anybody going up against Utah. Total is pretty hefty here at 230.5. But still, I don't think there's anybody that individually really stands out here. Christian Wood was an excellent value play for a period of time because he was priced incorrectly, but his salaries come up. Kevin Porter Jr.'s salaries come up a little bit. Is there anything you look at from Houston and you say like, oh, this guy is somebody I want to get to as a good points per dollar play?
It's mostly just tournament shots for me. Christian Wood, Kevin Porter at 6,500, paid at 5,700. Like they're all reasonable. They all can certainly exceed those salaries, but Houston is playing a pretty deep rotation. You did get 36 minutes from Porter last game, 33 from Christian Wood, 32 from Gordon. Nobody else touched 30 minutes. So I think Wood is number one, Porter number two, but really just tournaments for me.
Yeah, and I don't even know if these are guys that I'm really going to end up getting to in tournaments, but same can't be said on the Utah side of the game because the Utah Jazz, Hassan Whiteside remains out in health and safety protocol. That is less significant. What is significant here, Donovan Mitchell has a concussion. So we've heard a lot about the health and safety protocol this year. Not that often somebody's in the concussion protocol in the NBA, which is where Donovan Mitchell finds himself. As a result, Joe Ingles, Jordan Clarkson, Bojan Bogdanovic, Mike Conley could all expect them to play bigger roles. You look at the current ownership projections. Over on FanDuel, the most popular player on the slate we talked about before is DeAnthony Melton. Second most popular, Mike Conley. Third most popular, Jordan Clarkson. Fourth most popular, Bojan Bogdanovic. And then you also have Joe Ingles and Rudy Gobert round out some of the most popular plays on the slate. So 5 of the most 7-owned players on FanDuel from the Utah Jazz. Same situation over on DK. Melton number 1, 2 Clarkson, 3 Ingles, 4 Gobert, 5 Conley, 6 Bojan Bogdanovic. There is going to be a ton of ownership going to the Utah Jazz today. Of these chalk plays, number 1, do you think it's warranted? Number 2, which ones do you like the most?
Yeah, I do think it's warranted. I mean, not only are you taking out a 33% usage guy in Mitchell, who also gets some assists and plays, 33 or 34 minutes, but you're also facing the Houston Rockets. So it's just a really, really good spot to get to. The prices haven't adjusted. One slightly negative thing to point out on Mike Conley is that he has not been the same player this year without Mitchell as he was last year. He's played 3 games without Mitchell this year. He's averaged like 1.1 DraftKings points per minute. Overall, he's averaged 1 DraftKings point per minute without Mitchell on the floor. If you include the 9 games he played last year, he's averaged 1.32 DraftKings points per minute in the games without Mitchell. So I don't think it's quite fair to expect just the same Mike Conley that we got last year, because he did just produce at a higher rate in general. But he's still priced for Mitchell to be in, so he's still very clearly underpriced. There's more minutes available for guys like Clarkson and Ingles. Ingles isn't a great fantasy option, but he's still 3,700 shooting guard, small forward, should play plenty of minutes. I assume he's going to start in place of Mitchell, probably play around 30 minutes. So makes him look like a very good value. Clarkson gets more minutes, and we know he's just going to go out there and chuck. Bogdanovich and O'Neal probably play a few more minutes, just because typically, like when we talk about Utah, we talk about, oh yeah, all these guys are going to play like 30 minutes and they're all going to look the same. When someone is out, typically they don't go much deeper into their bench when you're talking about just one guy being out. Typically you just get a few more minutes for Boyan, you get a few more minutes for O'Neal, you get a couple more minutes for Ingles and Clarkson, and that's how they soak up a lot of those minutes. So it makes them all look a lot more appealing, in addition to the fact that there's more usage to go around without Mitchell. And then on a side note, someone that I don't think is really affected by Mitchell, but Rudy Gobert plays a lot when Hassan Whiteside is not active. And now you're getting him at a very fair $8,500 price tag facing the Rockets. He looks great as well. The only real question about this team to me is like, how many guys can you play in the same lineup on a slate this big?
Yeah, and then something else to talk about when it comes to Ingles, because Joe Ingles has sucked this year from a points per minute basis. And from the start of the show, I've seen chat already murmuring like, I hate Joe Ingles. I can't play this guy. He's 3,700 on DK. On FanDuel, Joe Ingles is 3,700 as well. So same price point on both sites. He averages 21 fantasy points as a starter this season. Is that the end all be all, or that's like, oh my God, so that's the great? It's not the greatest thing in the world, but relative to a 3,700 price tag, it's pretty solid. And something else to consider, a lot of those starts are with Mike Conley out and Donovan Mitchell in, and there's more usage to go around without Donovan Mitchell. So now you're looking at somebody you're projecting for like 24 fantasy points in Joe Ingles at his price point, really good points per dollar play. I get everybody hates him, play him in tournaments, and you should certainly be playing him in cash games as well. I still like Joe Ingles. Anything else you want to talk about here pertaining to the Utah Jazz?
I guess to kind of answer the question I had thrown out, like I think, like I doubt I play more than 3 from this team just because there are so many games on the slate. The opportunity cost is high. Like if you get a ceiling game from Bogdanovich and a ceiling game from Clarkson, it's not that likely you're getting a ceiling game from Gobert too, unless somebody on Houston scored like 100 points. So like I'm still going to be relatively limited in how many of them I get in individual lineups, but all of Gobert, Clarkson, Bogdanovich, Conley, Ingles look like priorities here.
Yeah, and then also I know you answered somebody's question in the YouTube chat where it was Jeremy Savage who said I could see all these guys letting down. Seems unlikely to me, and I honestly doubt I'm going to have any lineups that don't have at least one Utah Jazz player today, because all of them are really good points per dollar plays. And if you're saying that all of them let down, it just doesn't make sense. Somebody just has to come through and take extra shots and play extra minutes in place of Donovan Mitchell, unless it's just a scenario where Houston's totally unable to score against Utah and the score's like 50-30 at halftime. They don't have to play the starters in the second half. At least one or two of these Utah guys are going to have big games relative to their salaries.
Yeah, I mean, if you think all of Utah is going to fail, you should be either firing money at 12-point dog, Houston money line, or you should be slamming the under here, because there's not really any way this game hits a 232 total and everybody on Utah fails at these prices.
Yeah, that's how I see it as well. So Utah, that is going to be the team that the field gets the most exposure to, and I believe I will as well. 3 games left here to talk about, and the LA Clippers at the Denver Nuggets. The Clippers, not a lot to see here in my opinion. I know there's no Kawhi Leonard, no Paul George, but Paul George has been out for an extended period of time. Kawhi's been out for the entire season. So even with all this usage available, we've kind of seen it at this point. There's some upside in Reggie Jackson at this price point. Nobody here that's really a priority play for me. Luke Kennard is questionable. I don't know that him being out is going to make that big of a difference for me, because then it'll just be extra minutes to get allocated to Terrence Mann, Eric Bledsoe, Nick Batum, kind of across the board. Anything that really stands out to you from the Clippers?
No, hate the spot, hate the team, kind of hate everything. Reggie Jackson at 6K certainly has a ceiling. He's like a 30% usage rate guy. Marcus Morris at 6,500, kind of the same thing, but not 30% usage, but like 23, 24%, relatively high ceiling. But plenty of other stuff I like on this slate before I get to the Clippers.
All right, so let's talk about the other side, the Denver Nuggets and Nikola Jokic. Top pay up option on the slate for me. If you have the ability to spend up for Nikola Jokic, a little more so on DK than FanDuel, just because you could also play Nikola Jokic in the center and the utility spot. You have the upside. You're playing for Jokic. I have Jokic projected for the most fantasy points on the slate. Is it the same for you?
Yes. It just feels like a broken record at this point with Jokic. Highest projected guy on the slate, pretty much always is. Really, really good play if you get there. There's probably enough value on this slate that you can. Opportunity cost of the position is still high, like especially on a slate of this size and him being center only. You do run the risk of Jokic has a good game, scores 67 DraftKings points, and I don't know, Yusuf Nurkic goes for 60 and Bobby Portis goes for 50, and you're just like, shit, I wasted money on Jokic. But I mean, it's still the highest projected guy on a slate where it's not that difficult to get to him. I want as much Jokic as I can get to, really.
Yeah, and then one other player that I do find to be interesting here, Bones Highland. I get the recent games have been blowouts, but he's playing a bunch of minutes. Last two games for Bones Highland, 37 minutes, 33 minutes. I can't project him for quite that much, but even just mid to high 20s minutes for Bones Highland at his current salary, I think is something that's appealing. He's only projected for 8% ownership on DK on FanDuel. He's projected for less than 1% ownership. What do you make of Bones Highland's minutes?
Pretty appealing first half rotations as well. Against the Lakers 2 games ago, he played like 14 minutes in the first half. Against Utah last game, he played a ton. He played like 18 minutes in the first half. I really like these rotations. He's subbing in ahead of Campazzo. He's just getting a lot of first half runs. So like, yeah, he has benefited as far as he's not necessarily going to be in the closing lineup in a competitive game, though he could. Like, there's no reason he can't just be out there instead of Jeff Green and you move Aaron Gordon to the 4. But either way, if you're going to get, let's say, 26 minutes from Highland, he's still going to look like a pretty good option. And there's certainly the potential for more. So, and then also you kind of have like backdoor outs too, where maybe he doesn't play as much as we're hoping, but then the game blows out and he still gets there. So as long as the ownership's low, I'm certainly interested.
Anything else here to talk about from Denver? If not, I will move on to the last couple of games.
The point about Rivers, yeah, that like that is a concern, I think, just because it's another body. But I still think that Malone is likely to find minutes for Highland at this point.
Yeah, and then once again, also, he's sub 10% owned on DK, sub 1% on FanDuel. It's not like we're talking about somebody that's projected for a massive amount of ownership. Given how good of a points per minute fantasy producer Highland has shown to be this year, if he's going to be cheap, which isn't changing, and he's not going to be popular, he's somebody to take shots on in tournaments. Like I view Highland as a really good pivot off of a popular Joe Ingles. That's how I view him.
I agree with that for sure. Yeah, and like when you look at Denver's rotation too, Reed played 16 minutes, including the garbage time against Utah. He played 26 minutes, including the garbage time against the Lakers. Like, you can give his minutes to Rivers too. The biggest concern for me with Highland is we've already had a stretch this year where Highland started getting more minutes off the bench. Michael Malone said, we really need to just let Highland go out there and do his thing and let him make plays for this team. And then he like had amnesia and just stopped playing Highland more than 15 minutes. So that's my concern. But to what you're saying, if he's only going to be 8% owned, the payouts to getting the good Highland game far outweigh the risk of, getting the 16-minute Highland game.
Yeah, and then something else I'll say, there's a lot of variance in Bones Highland's minutes, but if Bones Highland plays 28 minutes and Joe Ingles plays 32 minutes, I'm going to have Highland projected for way more fantasy points in that scenario than Ingles, and Ingles is going to have like 5x the ownership. So something else to kind of consider when we're just talking about the GPP angles and trying to find as much upside as possible. But we're starting to run short on time, so I'm going to move on here. The Detroit Pistons, Kelly Olynyk questionable play, Killian Hayes questionable, Frank Jackson questionable. Kind of makes it hard to know what to make of a lot of these guys other than Cade Cunningham, for whatever reason, remains criminally underpriced on FanDuel. The 7,300 price tag on DK is about reasonable to me, but 6,000 on FanDuel. Play Cade Cunningham at 6,000 on FanDuel against the Kings.
Yeah, I even like the $7,300 price tag on DraftKings because, they still are 7-point dogs against the Kings, which is just some kind of special, but it's less likely that they get run off the court. Like it's likely you're getting Cade Cunningham fourth quarter minutes and that you're getting 33, 34 minutes from him in a really good spot. So FanDuel, fantastic, like really tough to get away from. DraftKings, I think he still looks pretty good. Diallo and Bay are fine, but don't really stand out. On DraftKings, all that I really see as standing out are Cunningham, and then if you want to take a shot on one of the Lyles/Stewart pairing, and then obviously some guys like Hayes might get ruled out, and that changes some things. But assuming that he's in for now, it's pretty much Cunningham, and then maybe one of the centers.
On the other side of the game, Tyrese Halliburton, health and safety protocols. He's out. That makes De'Aaron Fox look more appealing. Buddy Hield kind of been priced up at this point. Harrison Barnes as well, but no Tyrese Halliburton. So I'm going to be looking at Fox as a pretty good tournament option. Front court, Richaun Holmes is back. Also really cheap, $4,400 on DK. On FanDuel, Richaun Holmes is $5,400, picking up no ownership. How do you view Richaun Holmes as a tournament play? Because I don't know what those minutes are going to look like, but if he's not going to be owned, he's cheap. I think there's upside there. I kind of like getting to Holmes here.
I kind of like it. He started last game, only played 15 minutes. But like at 4,400, if he even gets to, like he got to 24 minutes, he'd look great. On a slate this big, I kind of doubt that I get to that much, but it's the type of thing where you could be really pissed off that you didn't take that risk at the end of the night.
Yeah, that's how I view it as well. As I think Richaun Holmes, and maybe we get more information on his minutes where we get a really clear idea what his playing time is going to look like. But just based on the fact that he could play 24 to 26 minutes, I like Richaun Holmes at 4,400 and no ownership. Marvin Bagley, is he somebody that you would also like to get back to? He's had some big games recently.
I'm not that interested in Bagley, and the reason is that the front court is getting healthier. Typically what we've seen this year from the Kings is that they play a center, whether that is Jones or Holmes or Len or Thompson. They play a center, and then you get like Bagley and Metu splitting power forward minutes. When Bagley was having the big, like Bagley's best games were when either Metu was out or they started, I think it was against the Lakers, they started Metu alongside Bagley. That opens the door for Bagley to play a bunch of minutes. But for as long as Bagley and Metu are both likely to only play the four, you can only really expect like 24 minutes from Bagley, which makes it pretty tough to like him.
Yeah, and people are asking about Terrence Davis. Bagley was out last game with Bagley back. I just think Terrence Davis goes back to a minimal role. It looks like he's going to be...
I think Davis starts.
You think he starts again?
Yeah, because Metu started last game, and they're not going to start Bagley and Metu next to each other. Unless Holmes doesn't start.
Yeah, maybe. So how many minutes do you think Davis plays then?
30 plus.
30 plus? We'll see what the starting lineup looks like. I feel differently right now, but not a lot of information here. We'll have to know what, number one, what the starting lineup looks like, and then number two, what the minutes restriction is for Richaun Holmes. If Terrence Davis starts, I think he looks good. If he comes off the bench, less so. So more information needed there. But I'll go on to the final game of the slate. And also for Terrence Davis, it's very much going to depend on what kind of news we get out of the Kings. I agree. I would like Terrence Davis if he starts. I'm just not convinced that's going to be the situation right now. And they've done really weird things with Terrence Davis's minutes. He was one of the Kings' better players for a brief period of time. And they just fell out of the rotation entirely, which was super weird. So hard to know what to make of the minutes there, for me at least. Last game to look at here, Indiana Pacers at the Lakers. Starting with the Pacers, Malcolm Brogdon is questionable. I don't know what to do with this team with him being listed as questionable, because if he's in, nobody's really all that appealing, even with Miles Turner out.
Yeah, I mean, Turner being out, I think, is a plus for Sabonis. Like, you should get better rebounding numbers, but it's not like Turner's a great rebounder anyway. But Sabonis is typically better at center. He's also 10,100 though, so you're paying a decent price for him. LeVert is reasonable. If Brogdon's out, I like LeVert at 7,900. He's got like a 32% usage rate and a bump in assist percentage this year in the games he's played without Brogdon and with Sabonis. If Brogdon's in, I have a hard time paying 7,900 for LeVert. Yeah, just a lot. I guess a lot does depend for me on Brogdon.
And I know people are going to want to play Goga because he had a big game last time with Turner out, but it's kind of hard for me to get behind Goga just because, all right, so he's good last game with Turner out, but let's go 2 games ago when Turner was out. Goga played 5 minutes.
Right.
It's hard for me to know what to make of that playing time there too. If Goga starts, good value play. If he comes off the bench, I can't trust his minutes.
Yeah, like if he starts, I agree, good value because it's a good sign for his minutes. Last game, he played 8 minutes in the first half, and I think a lot of times you would just see like 16 minutes from him as the backup center. So like that's the risk. The upside, I guess, is that you're getting a $3,600 guy that if he plays well could close. But yeah, it's pretty risky if he's coming off the bench.
All right, final team to talk about here, the Los Angeles Lakers. Carmelo Anthony is questionable. I don't think that has any kind of real massive major impacts. LeBron James, no longer a center on DraftKings. He's gone from center only to point guard, small forward. He's been eligible at every position this year other than shooting guard. Just make him every position eligible, and that'll be fun. But that aside, if you have the ability to pay up for LeBron, no issues there. The most interesting talking point here for me, Russell Westbrook is $7,500 on FanDuel. I know he hasn't been great this year, but how do we avoid 7,500 Russell Westbrook on FanDuel?
Actually, I want to make one other quick Goga point real quick, semi-related here. Assuming LeBron James closes this game at center, that's horrible for Goga's chances of closing at center.
That's true also.
Like he closed against Zubats last game. If Dwight Howard closes this game, then maybe you get Zubat, or maybe you get Goga. But assuming we're getting LeBron closing at center, that's horrible for Goga. Westbrook at 7,500 on FanDuel, I think looks good. We know that their pricing isn't ideal for Westbrook's type of play, but he's still likely to give you, 35, 36 minutes somewhere in there. He's still like a 1.15 fantasy point, FanDuel point per minute guy. So still a really appealing price tag.
All right, that is going to do it for us today, guys. A little rush at the end that'll happen on 13-game slates, but we still have the deeper dive. We have live before lock. Adam and I are going to be doing our NBA injury report video. So check all of that out. Like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Good luck today.